Hi, welcome back to our next video in our Coffee and Chat with the Environmental Health Expert series. My name is Claire Nitchie, and I'm a health educator here at Washington State Department of Health. And joining me today is my colleague Brad Cunningham, who's one of our senior epidemiologists and the section manager for climate and health. So I want to talk to you today, Rad, about heat events, because I know in the last couple of years, I've started paying more attention to them myself. And as one of our leading experts on this, could you talk to me about what a heat event is as we're, starting to get to spring and the days are warming up and we're looking ahead to summer?
Yeah, I think, a lot of people will remember the heat dome. That was a major heat event in Washington State that sort of woke us up to the idea that, heat events are a significant public health threat in Washington State. So there was a lot of deaths and hospitalizations associated with that event. And there's a lot of common sense measures you can do to prepare yourself for heat events. But a heat event takes into account not just how hot is it, but how hot is it compared to how hot it usually is. So a heat event in Forks, Washington will look a lot different than a heat event in Yakima. A normal day in Yakima would be a heat event in Forks, just because they're different. The people, the bodies, are used to a different temperature in Forks versus Yakima, and the infrastructure is ready for different temperature places. And so the heat event can look different in a different place. It's not one thing, but it kind of takes into account how long is it going to be hot, how much of the day is it going to be hot, how much is it going to cool off at night. So a lot of these things. And luckily, you don't have to do a bunch of your own math to figure out, is a heat event coming. The National Weather Service and the Centers for Disease Control work together on this thing called the heat risk, which is a sort of a composite measure that takes into account a bunch of weather data to kind of figure out how risky the heat is going to be in a certain area based on a lot of the things I just mentioned.
So how bad a heat event has a lot to do with how hard it's going to be for your body to adjust, and also how long it would have to adjust for. Did I get that right?
Right.
Okay, cool. So you mentioned something in there about how you prepare, and I know, especially working in public health, we're in the business of prevention, and one of the things we do is we think about how do we prepare for things so that we can help people out when a heat dome or an event happens. If I was looking at this summer and remembering the heat dome and wanted to prepare for myself, my family, my pets, what can I do? Because I know that sometimes it's best to prepare instead of wait till the event is right on top of us. So what could I do if I was a Washingtonian and wanted to be ready for a heat event if it was going to happen this summer?
Yeah, I think one thing that I think public health forgets in general is that you can have some fun, plan some fun. There are so many things you can do when it's hot out in Washington State that are fun, swimming, going out, in Olympia, we have these spray parks. There's a few places with spray parks. Popsicles, cool drinks, going to a movie in an air-conditioned space. Those are all things that you can kind of just have in your mind of here are some things we can do when it gets super hot to try and get through it. But it's not all fun. So I don't want to give. There are some people for whom this is a life and death issue, and so don't want to gloss over that. But I'd say, think about how you're going to have some fun, and think about your home and how you're going to manage your home. So I think about, let's say you're in a rural area and you have a single family home and there's no air conditioner. Okay. Open your windows at night as soon as it's cooler outside than it is inside, and leave them open all night. And if you have a fan that can blow air out of your house, it'll kind of pull air through your house and can kind of do what we call pre-cooling. So you're pre-cooling your house to get ready for the next hot day. And then in the morning, before you have to leave for work or before it gets, very warm out, close all the windows, close all your shutters or blinds or whatever you have. We have some skylights in our house that we just shove pillows into, block the sun from coming in. And that will help keep your house cooler longer.
Wow. So I've always heard about doing that during a heat event, but it didn't occur to me that you could start that cooling cycle for your house naturally with that colder air even leading up to it, and that would still make a difference. So that's really good to know. And also, thinking about what resources are around me that I might be able to lean on during a heat event. Is there a space that's safe to go swimming? Is there, is there a good popsicle stand? Is there what can I do that I can just be aware of is in my neighborhood? So Are there some other steps that somebody might be able to take to prepare their home, or is there any other tips that you would have to get ready, like knowing that we might have something going on that isn't just about the resources that are around us?
Right. And the answer to that question is it can really depend on the individual. So for a lot of people in Washington, especially in Western Washington, there's not a lot of air conditioning. And right now there's a lot of federal and state incentives for things like heat pumps, and sometimes even city level incentives for things like heat pumps. So check with your local utility and see what incentives they have. And even with the incentives, it can still be expensive, so that's not an option for everybody. But the heat pumps will add a very like efficient heating and cooling system to your house, and sometimes the state or local federal government will pay for part of that, which is great. And then they'll also do insulation. So there's incentives for insulation. So insulating your home will help keep it cooler longer during the day, and it'll help keep the heat out during the night, or help keep the heat out during the day and like keep it cool inside during the night. And so those are some big, things you can do. Or, for a couple $100, you can get a, window AC unit, which can make all the difference in the world. If you've got one cool bedroom in your house, that's going to be a big bonus for your heat resilience. But I also think it's helpful to have a plan for like, okay, at some point, if it gets hot enough to overwhelm, the cooling capacity of my home, what am I going to do? And some people who have resources will just, get a hotel somewhere and go there and enjoy the AC at the hotel. And other people don't have that opportunity. And so there are, you can go to the mall, often has air conditioning, or if you can afford a movie, that will have air conditioning. And you can also call 211, and that phone number will connect you with the cooling centers in your area. And so there's a lot of registered cooling centers that people can go to, and it's good to know where the closest one is, and just in case you have to use it. And I'll also say, if next time you meet with your provider, or you can even maybe send them a message on if you've got a email, your provider function, some medications can put you at risk during a heat event. So medications for some cardiovascular conditions and some psychiatric conditions will actually put you at more risk for extreme heat. And some medications in general, just aren't supposed to get that hot. If you see the storing instructions, they say, store at whatever temperature, in a cool, dry place. If it gets too hot, it could compromise those medications and make them less safe to take. So think about the meds you're going to need and how you're going to make sure those meds are cool, and if those medications might make you more vulnerable to heat during a heat dome.
So if I, resources where I wouldn't need to have money to do it, I could, if I have a home, I can, ahead of an event, start opening the windows, letting things cool down, and then keeping that cooler air in. I can call 211 to get access to some of the cooling centers that are in my area, which are a free resource that you can go to cool down. It sounds like get to know your neighbors and make sure that you're aware of what resources you might be able to share together if you have neighbors nearby. And it sounds like if you have the resources and the finances to be able to, you could go to a movie, some of these other places that are cooler, like a hotel, or you can even buy an AC unit and install it in your house. Are there any other online resources that DOH has that can help somebody learn how they could plan for a heat event if they wanted something that was written down, or just to be able to share something with their family?
Yeah, we do have an extreme heat page at the Department of Health that will talk to you, that will describe in more detail some of the things you can do. And I'll also plug the Department of Labor and Industries webpage on heat preparedness. So as a worker, you should know your rights for heat. Washington State has a occupational rule that provides for making sure there's water and rests and cool places and available to workers as the heat increases. Those protections also increase. So just know what your rights are, and if you're an employer, you should know those rights as well and be ready to provide those. Because I think there's the no resource people. Then there's what about the very high resource people? If you have a if you own a building or apartment building or you're going to be required to meet some energy efficiency standards under Washington's climate rules. And while you're doing that, take care of the people who are going to be in those buildings as well.
Yeah.
And so there's opportunities there as well. And also, if you're an advocate type person, maybe talk to your building owner or manager about what you'd like to see in terms of heat. And I think that's a big part of heat preparedness in general. Like, there's the things you can do for yourself and your family, but it also, like, what about your community? Most any city that's planning under like the Growth Management Act has to have a climate section in their plan. And that's an opportunity to say, hey, why, maybe we don't use blacktops anymore to try and reduce the urban heat island effect, or maybe we do invest more in street trees and make plans together as a city to be more resilient together, because there's a lot of focus on like, how do I protect me and myself and my like bubble of people, which is important to do. But how do you work to make sure we're all safe and working, what is your school doing? What is your community center doing? What is your church doing?
Yeah.
And those sorts of communal things can have a huge impact, especially when you start to know people who are interested in the same thing.
Yeah.
I think about my neighbor is an older woman who has one tiny ancient air conditioner for her whole house. And during the heat dome, we just went over there and we're like, how are you doing? Are you okay? And she was fine, but she knew that if she wasn't, she has our phone number and we'd be available to help her. And that's probably more valuable than a lot of these like things where you spend money on. I really enjoyed Gina McCarthy. She talks about preparedness. And she said, maybe the best thing you can do to prepare for any sort of emergency is bake your neighbor some muffins.
Yeah.
Because then you know somebody, you've got a good positive relationship, and you will get through that disaster better together than you would by yourself.
So what I'm hearing from you is not just important to know like what physical resources are available to you. One of the things that makes a huge difference is also your community resources. How well do you know the people around you? Can you lean on people? Are you checking on people and making sure that we're all getting through something? Because we're all experiencing this at the same time.
Right.
Awesome. Well, Rad, thank you so much for taking some time to talk with me this morning and helping me prepare. There's so many different considerations when we're looking at these events that we all experience at the same time. And it's been really helpful to just hear you break down what we need to consider as some even just starting points for somebody who maybe just moved to Washington and hasn't experienced something like this and wants to know what they can do to protect their health and the health of their loved ones.
Great. Well, thanks, Claire. It's great being here.